Yes. Okay.
Follow up on that. You know, I think we've focused a lot on the optimism of optimistic users of games. We haven't focused on pessimistic users of games. When you guys were talking about the analogy between books and games, you know, what about things like propaganda or advertising? You know, we're like looking to unlock games, figure out how we can use them to affect people's behavior. You know, what if games become something that can be used just to drive people to purchase products? You know, we have this system that we're setting up. You know, we're playing God. There's the real potential to do something damaging. Should we be exploring this? Or are there things that we shouldn't be doing as gamers?
Let me just give you one example. This goes back to the World of Warcraft thing. Which, by the way, Richard Bartle doesn't point to World of Warcraft, but in designing virtual worlds, he basically says that a lot of virtual worlds are bad for people. For the very reason you described. They set up reward structures that don't stop. And he argues very strongly, and I think Ralph Koster argues this sort of a little bit askew in theory of fun, that these things should end. Like, you should get to a conclusion, because that's part of the delivery of this. And just to give an example, this is like, if you know what variable reward structures are, you know, psychologically, you know, the thing that makes the rat go for the sugar infinitely to the point where it won't eat anything else. You know, like, there's ways you can trick human brains. This is, I think, this is the dark side of the evolution, right? There's wiring in us that'll make us pull the lever forever and stop eating. That's not so good. Yeah, and I think there's ways it gets used and it will get used, and I think that's part of our immaturity, is that we don't have nasty, evil propaganda games. Although there's some that people are calling that, right? I mean, there's games that border, you know, if you take a kind of a conservative American ethical approach, like there's games about Palestinians hunting Israeli people, like that exists. Super Columbine Massacre exists. I don't think that's an immoral game, but many people do. Left Behind, yeah, and like the ethics of Left Behind. There's like a lot of questions. Left Behind, the game about the rapture, in which the Jewish people and the Muslim people go to hell, right? I mean, like, these things exist, and they're going to only exist more. It's a medium, right? And it's going to grow as a medium, the way mediums grow, in ways we don't want it to get into the hands of people who don't want to use it. That's the flip side of user-generated content, is that everybody can build, everybody can build. But I think, I don't know, I think it's inevitable, so I don't even kind of want to argue about it. It's simply going to happen, and we should just face it. I think the answer to it is to become sophisticated about the medium faster, because the faster we develop people with the critical thinking skills to evaluate these things as they come about, the more we can disempower propaganda and false argumentation and false structures when they appear.
Yeah, so I want to address that. But, you know, by the way, we're completely free to make an answer game where, you know, the Christian believers end up finding out later that actually the paradise that they wanted is even worse, and we could call it right behind. I don't know, just a thought.
The thing is, there's going to, you know, there has to be some kind of economic structure behind games, and the reason why games are going to get into the schools is because the demographics are changing in games, and girls like to play games now. And so somebody's going to try to figure out a way to put games in schools and do advertising with them and make money through them, because it's a vast market, the school market. And it's like a parallel world to the commercial market we're used to. But the thing is, books never really have carried advertising. And that's what's really good about the internet. It wasn't developed to be commercial. And so, you know, games do have the potential to get into the classroom without carrying advertising and without being about, you know, product placement or, you know, all the other ways that corporations affect movies and articles and things.
All right, last point.
I did want to get to your that was, I agree with that. So, for many years in television, of course, television exists only as a medium to advertise. That's it. It's the pure advertising medium. That's it.
In this country.
That's right. Yes, in the U.S. In the U.S. Right. And yeah, it was so cool. The first time I went to London and I turned on BBC Two and I started learning about quaternions. I was like, God, I love these people. Wow. Imagine seeing quaternions being taught in American. Anyway. And then you have these things like cable, like HBO, which of course also exists entirely to make money. And of course, Tony Soprano can whack people in a way that he couldn't on network television because there isn't the same government-imposed controls. But look what happened. This pure commercial thing does exist in this sort of community of what people really want and how far they're allowed to go. And there's this dance that goes on with HBO and Showtime, but they're not having, you know, the happy Nazi is the good guy torturing people. I mean, it's not, you know, there's sort of this awareness that we're engaged in a contract with our society. So even in these purely commercial, because I don't think it's about games, I think it's about a kind of a consensual set of permeable boundaries that everybody is trying to find of what are we okay with. And frankly, I think that if people did start doing certain kinds of things in places where kids could see them and it would hurt them, I think people would step in. But so it's not about game, it's about societal bargaining.
Okay.
I just want to make a quick comment.
Yep.
That, like, I guess it's kind of an optimistic view, but it seems like one great way of teaching new members of our society about those trade-offs and about the economic context in which these pieces of media exist is by playing World of Warcraft. And other games like it. I mean, they seem to, I mean, I think it goes back to Nick's original point, you know, that type of systemic learning and understanding how things work together rather than the knowledge itself can help players place these artifacts into the system, right?
Right, right. All right, so Anna's one last thing, and then we're going to break.
So just to go off of what you were saying, the analogy of TV, I mean, there have been people like David Rajewski from the Woodrow Wilson School who have argued that we should have a corporation for public gaming. And, you know, and if we look at video gaming as a medium similar to television or books, and people will do what they will with it, that there's some kind of publicly owned or institution that is going to use that medium for the common good. And I don't know if that idea is ever going to fly in the current political climate, but I do think it's a worthwhile thing to explore.
But the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is no longer funded, really.
You just have to remind yourself that every single complaint that's been raised about games was raised about novels just about 150 years ago. Every single one. They waste youth, they waste time, they teach people bad lessons, they corrupt people, they draw them out of the working world. These are exactly the things that people said about novels for a very long time, and now we beg our children to read.
And the theater too.
Yeah.
Right, so I do feel like we spent more time talking about potential and not so much about limitations, and I think it's worth digging into that. And we don't have time today, but this group will be around, I think, at the El Cantino, and if you want to push them on that question, and maybe you guys can have a follow-up panel that just looks... I do think it's easy to become an over-advocate and not begin to sort of really recognize that all mediums have limitations. And for us to really understand what those limitations are will make us design better systems. So I think it's definitely worth talking. So I just want to say thanks to our panelists. And also to the IGDA for hosting this event. It's a really important topic, I think, and for all of you coming out in the rain.